I survived the house fire my family set to claim my $12 million life insurance. So, I played dead in the ICU, let them celebrate, and brought a SWAT team to their door. I am Nathan. I am 33 years old, and exactly 1 year ago, I woke up in a sterile, freezing hospital room with my skin heavily wrapped in thick medical gauze and my lungs burning violently from severe smoke inhalation. My father, Arthur, was sitting right next to my bed, sobbing uncontrollably into his hands. He reached out, grabbed my unbandaged wrist, and told me that our family home had burned to the ground in the middle of the night. He said he tried everything to save them, but the flames were just too intense. He looked me dead in the eyes, tears streaming down his face, and said my mother and my younger brother did not make it out alive. He said I was the only family he had left. I was completely and utterly crushed. I felt a level of agonizing guilt that words cannot even begin to describe. I was the oldest son, I should have saved them. I cried with him until I choked on the oxygen tube, until my chest physically ached with grief. But there is one massive thing my father did not know. The very second he stepped out of that hospital room to grab a cup of coffee from the cafeteria, a female detective slipped quietly through the heavy wooden door. She checked the hallway nervously, clicked the door shut behind her, leaned in incredibly close to my ear, and whispered the words that would completely shatter my reality. She told me my mother and brother were not dead. She told me they were hiding in a luxury rental property, waiting for my massive life insurance payout to clear. And she told me my own family set that fire to burn me alive in my bed. Now, let me take you back to where this absolute nightmare truly started. When you grow up in a house where love is strictly transactional, you learn very early on how to survive by being constantly useful. You do not ask for affection, you earn it through manual labor, through perfect grades, through absolute, unquestioning obedience. My father, Arthur, was a man who cared about exactly two things in this entire world: acquiring money and meticulously controlling how other people perceived him. I was the invisible child. I was the one who did the heavy chores, fixed the leaky faucets, mowed the massive front lawn, and eventually paid for my own college fund by working grueling night shifts at a concrete supply warehouse. I would come home at 4 in the morning, covered in industrial dust and physical exhaustion, and find my parents asleep. Nobody ever left a plate of food out for me. Nobody ever asked how my classes were going. I was simply expected to handle my own life without burdening them in any way. Then there was my younger brother, Leo. Leo was the golden child. He could do absolutely no wrong in their eyes. He was the center of their entire universe. When I graduated college with a dual degree in finance and economics with top honors, my parents took me to a cheap local diner, gave me a firm handshake, and told me it was time I started paying them monthly rent for my childhood bedroom. They said it would teach me real-world responsibility. But, when Leo turned 18, after barely scraping by with a C- average in high school and getting suspended twice for fighting, my father bought him a brand new navy blue Maserati. I remember the exact day that car pulled into our driveway. I was inside sweating over my advanced accounting textbooks when I heard the heavy roar of the sports engine. I walked out to the front porch and saw Leo sitting behind the wheel of this gleaming machine. My father was standing next to the driver's side window, beaming with a kind of genuine pride I had never, ever seen directed at me. My mother, Eleanor, was taking dozens of photos of him to post online. I asked my father how he could possibly afford that kind of vehicle, and he just looked at me with cold, dismissive eyes. He said Leo needed a reliable, high-status car for his future. He said Leo had the kind of natural charm that was going to take him places, and he needed the right image to secure his place in the world. I spent my entire 20s desperately trying to earn that same look of pride. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I became financially successful enough, they would finally look at me the way they looked at Leo. That was my core, pathetic desire. I just wanted my family to love me. I wanted a seat at their table. I wanted to be invited to their dinners without being asked to fix the plumbing while I was there. That deep-rooted desperation made me completely blind to the monstrous predators my parents truly were. The real, tangible trouble started about 8 months before the house fire. Through years of grinding 60-hour workweeks, I had finally worked my way up to a senior financial analyst position at a major, highly respected real estate investment firm. The firm was run by a man named Mr. Sterling. He was an old-school corporate shark. He demanded absolute, uncompromising perfection, and he paid a massive salary to ensure he got it. I was doing extremely well. I had just gotten a major promotion, and my fiancée, Maya, and I were looking at buying our first house together. Maya was my anchor. She was the only person in my life who saw through the thick layer of polish my family tried to present to the world. She saw how they treated me, and she absolutely hated it. But she supported me anyway, knowing how deeply I craved their approval. My father saw my newfound success and immediately calculated how he could use it to his advantage. He pressured me constantly, relentlessly, to get Leo a job at Sterling's firm. Leo had dropped out of 2 different community colleges, had never held a job for more than 3 months, and was currently living comfortably in my parents' basement. He was racking up monumental credit card debt that my father was secretly paying off to protect Leo's credit score. My father called me every single day. The conversations were always aggressive guilt trips masked as fatherly advice. He told me that blood is thicker than water. He said it was my fundamental duty as the older, successful brother to help Leo build his 401k, get a decent corporate salary, and get his life on track. He reminded me of all the financial sacrifices they made raising me. Like an absolute idiot, desperate for his father's fleeting approval, I completely caved. I cashed in all my hard-earned political capital at work and literally begged Mr. Sterling to give Leo an entry-level accounting position in a subordinate department. That was the biggest, most catastrophic mistake of my entire life. Leo was an unmitigated disaster from day one. He showed up 40 minutes late almost every day. He left early to go to the gym, and he treated the corporate office like his own personal country club. Maya warned me very early on. We were having coffee in my kitchen one morning before work. She looked at me, completely deadpan, and pointed out the glaring red flags. She asked me how Leo was driving a luxury Maserati to an entry-level job where he made maybe $65,000 a year before taxes. She asked me how he was paying for premium gas, let alone the astronomical insurance premiums for a 20-something male driving a sports car. I brushed it off. I was in deep denial. I told her my parents were probably secretly draining their savings to fund his lifestyle just to keep up appearances. Then came the Thanksgiving dinner from hell. Maya and I sat at the long, polished mahogany dining table with my parents, Leo, and my Uncle Vance. Uncle Vance was my father's older brother. He always played the role of the wise, gentle, soft-spoken peacemaker. Whenever my father got aggressive or started yelling, Vance would pull me aside, pat my shoulder, and tell me to just be the bigger person and keep the peace. During that dinner, the tension was suffocating. I tried to proudly announce my recent promotion and the fact that Maya and I were officially starting the mortgage pre-approval process. Before I could even finish my sentence, my mother sharply tapped her crystal wine glass with a silver spoon. She completely talked over me, her voice shrill and commanding, and announced to the table that Leo had just signed the paperwork for a brand new, ultra-luxury penthouse apartment downtown. My father immediately raised his glass, beaming with pride, and toasted to Leo's brilliant real estate moves and his natural business acumen. Maya gripped my thigh under the table so hard her nails dug into my skin. I could feel her seething with white-hot anger on my behalf. I just sat there chewing my turkey, feeling completely invisible. A few weeks later, the grand illusion shattered into a million jagged pieces. I was staying late at the office on a Friday night doing a routine, mandatory audit on some of the escrow accounts Leo was supposed to be managing. I pulled up the secure spreadsheets, and the numbers simply did not add up. Whole columns of financial data were missing. Massive wire transfers were being routed out of client escrow accounts and disappearing into completely undocumented dummy accounts. I dug deeper, accessing the raw bank logs, and found a massive, gaping hole in the company's capital reserves. Leo was not just bad at his job. He was actively, systematically embezzling money. $6.5 million. I printed the logs, grabbed my keys, and drove straight to my parents' house. I didn't knock. I barged in and marched straight into my father's home office. I threw the thick stack of printed spreadsheets violently onto his heavy oak desk. My father did not jump. He did not look surprised. He did not yell at Leo, who was sitting on the leather sofa playing a game on his phone. Instead, my father looked at me with cold, dead, reptilian eyes. He leaned back in his leather executive chair and told me in a completely calm voice that I needed to fix it. He told me I had the senior executive system access required to move the company's money around and permanently cover Leo's tracks. I felt the blood drain from my face. I refused. I told him Mr. Sterling was bringing in aggressive external auditors at the end of the month, and if I covered up a multi-million-dollar theft, I would be the one facing a massive lawsuit and going to federal prison for corporate fraud. My father stood up slowly, walked around the desk, and placed his heavy hand on my shoulder. His grip was painfully tight. He said, "Family protects family at all costs." He said if I let Leo go down for this, the resulting public scandal would ruin my parents' spotless reputation in the community, destroy my mother's fragile health, and drag our family name through the mud. Then, Uncle Vance, who was sitting quietly in the corner nursing a glass of expensive bourbon, chimed in. He said in a soft, incredibly reasonable voice that surely a smart, capable guy like me could figure out a way to take the blame for a minor accounting error without facing actual jail time. They wanted me to take the fall. They wanted me to sacrifice my pristine career, my upcoming marriage to Maya, and my actual freedom so the golden child could keep driving his Maserati and living in his penthouse. I looked at the three of them. The sheer entitlement was suffocating. I told them absolutely not. I told them Leo was on his own. I turned around, walked out of that house, and slammed the heavy front door so hard the decorative glass rattled. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere surrounding my family turned completely poisonous. My mother stopped returning my calls entirely. My father started showing up at my apartment unannounced, aggressively banging on my door and demanding I log into the servers and fix the numbers before the audit. I held my ground. I told them the auditors were scheduled to review the physical, heavily encrypted backup servers that I was temporarily keeping in my home office by the end of the week. I thought they would eventually realize they had lost and hire a defense lawyer for Leo. I severely underestimated the depths of their depravity. The night before the fire, Maya was out of town visiting her sister in Seattle. I was home alone, exhausted, and completely stressed out. My childhood best friend, Derek, stopped by randomly around 9 at night. Derek and I had known each other for over 10 years. We grew up playing baseball together. I even helped pay his rent a few times when he was struggling to find work. He knocked on the door, asked for a beer, and hung out in my living room. But Derek seemed incredibly nervous. He was sweating, constantly checking his phone, and shifting his weight on my couch. Then he started asking me weird, incredibly specific questions about my home security system. He asked if my exterior cameras were connected to a cloud server or a local hard drive inside the house. He asked if my smoke detectors were hardwired into the ceiling or just battery operated. I thought it was incredibly odd, but I was so exhausted from the looming corporate audit at work that my brain simply did not process the imminent danger. I answered his questions blindly, finished my beer, and he left abruptly without saying goodbye. Later that night, around 11:30, I realized I had some important mail that had been mistakenly delivered to my place instead of my parents' house. It was a sensitive tax document. Despite the absolute war happening between us, I decided to drive over and drop it in their mailbox just to get it out of my house and off my mind. As I pulled my car up to the edge of their manicured driveway, I saw my father loading 3 extremely large, heavy suitcases into the massive trunk of his Bentley. My mother and Leo were standing on the front porch in the dark, whispering frantically to each other. When my headlights swept across the driveway and hit them, they froze like deer caught in headlights. My mother practically shoved Leo into the house and slammed the front door shut. My father quickly slammed the Bentley trunk down and walked over to my driver's side window with a fake, remarkably tight smile. He said they were just doing some late-night spring cleaning and taking old winter clothes to the donation bin at midnight with premium hard-shell luggage. I handed him the mail through the window. My stomach was tied in tight, painful knots. Every biological instinct in my body screamed that something was terribly, fundamentally wrong, but my logical brain simply refused to accept that my own flesh and blood was capable of true, premeditated evil. I drove back to my house, locked my deadbolts, set my security alarm, and went to sleep. I had absolutely no idea I was about to wake up in hell. I woke up to the horrific, choking smell of burning plastic and raw gasoline. The digital clock on my nightstand read 2:14 in the morning. The room was already hazy with thick, rolling black smoke. The heat pressing against the bedroom walls was absolutely suffocating. I jumped out of bed, coughing violently, and rushed to my bedroom door. I grabbed the brass doorknob, and it instantly seared the skin right off the palm of my hand. I screamed in pure agony, grabbed a heavy cotton t-shirt off the floor, wrapped it tightly around my blistering hand, and aggressively turned the knob. The door would not open. It was jammed solid, not just stuck due to the heat expanding the wood, but physically wedged and locked from the outside hallway. Someone had deliberately barricaded me inside my room. Pure, unfiltered panic hit me like a freight train. I threw my entire body weight against the heavy wooden door over and over again, bruising my shoulder to the bone, but it did not budge a single inch. Smoke was pouring in rapidly through the bottom crack, carrying the distinct, heavy chemical smell of an accelerant. Someone had poured gallons of gasoline right outside my bedroom door. This fire was not an electrical short, it was a planned execution. I turned away from the door and ran to the window. My bedroom was on the second floor. The flames were already violently licking up the side of the house, shattering the glass windows in the living room directly below me. I grabbed a heavy metal desk lamp and violently smashed my bedroom window. The sudden rush of fresh oxygen fed the fire outside, and a wall of blistering heat blasted into the room, singeing my eyebrows and burning my face. I did not have time to think. The floorboards beneath my feet were getting too hot to stand on. I climbed onto the windowsill, looked down into the pitch-black yard, and threw myself into the darkness. I hit the ground incredibly hard. The impact sent a sickening, loud crunch echoing through my right leg. Blinding pain exploded up my spine. My tibia was snapped cleanly in half, the jagged bone pressing dangerously against my skin. I dug my elbows into the dirt and dragged myself across the wet grass, pulling my heavy, broken body away from the roaring inferno. The entire first floor was a massive wall of orange and red flames. The heat was so intensely powerful it was melting the vinyl siding on my neighbor's house across the yard. I lay there on the lawn, screaming for help, screaming for someone to call 911. My elderly neighbor ran out of his house in his bathrobe, dragging a garden hose, looking absolutely terrified. The fire trucks arrived minutes later, their sirens piercing the night. The paramedics rushed over, strapped me to a rigid backboard, pumped me full of heavy painkillers, and loaded me into the back of the ambulance. As the heavy doors closed, I watched through the small window as my house, my home office, and the corporate servers containing all the physical audit evidence burned to absolute ash. 3 days later, I woke up in the hospital. That brings us to the exact moment my father sat by my bed and delivered his award-winning, tear-filled performance. He told me my mother and Leo had come over to check on me that night, and they got trapped in the fire. He cried actual tears. He held my bandaged hand. Then Detective Harper walked in. She was sharp, highly professional, and took absolutely zero nonsense from anyone. After my father left the room, she gave me the raw, unfiltered truth. She told me the fire marshal found undeniable evidence of extreme premeditated arson. Multiple ignition points, gasoline poured specifically around the exits and heavily concentrated outside my bedroom door. But the biggest bombshell was the bodies, or rather the complete lack of them. The forensic investigators painstakingly combed through the ashes. There were no human remains inside that house. None. My mother and brother were not dead. Update 1. Detective Harper pulled out her phone and showed me a still frame from a state highway traffic camera located 40 miles from my house. The timestamp was 1:45 in the morning. It showed my father's Bentley and Leo's Maserati driving in perfect tandem toward the state line. They had packed their bags, locked me in my room, set the house on fire, and casually drove away while I burned. I felt physically sick. The betrayal was so deep, so profoundly evil, it felt like my chest had been carved open with a rusty knife. My own mother, my own father, my own brother. They sat around a table and decided my life was worth less than Leo's freedom. But it got worse. The psychological isolation campaign started immediately. My father returned to the hospital an hour later. He immediately complained to the hospital administration and fired the kind nurse who had been assigned to me, demanding a new one. He took my personal cell phone, claiming it was completely destroyed in the fire, and he would buy me a new one later. He physically stationed himself in the chair next to my bed and aggressively refused to let anyone visit me. I heard him out in the hallway talking to the doctors, insisting that I was suffering from severe PTSD and needed heavy sedatives to stay calm. He was actively trying to drug me into a stupor so I could not talk to the police or a lawyer. Luckily, Maya is an absolute force of nature. She bullied her way past the hospital security, completely ignoring my father's loud protests, and marched directly into my room. She took one look at my father and told him to step outside immediately or she would have him arrested for trespassing. My father's mask slipped for just a fraction of a second. His eyes went cold and furious, but he left the room. I grabbed Maya's hand tightly and told her everything Detective Harper had whispered to me. Maya did not cry. She did not panic. She went into full, calculated combat mode. We realized we needed to communicate securely without my father knowing. Maya left and came back an hour later. She bought a cheap burner phone and hid it deep inside a tissue box on my bedside table. The next day, my best friend, Derek, came to visit. My father actually allowed him inside, which immediately set off loud alarm bells in my head. Derek stood at the foot of my hospital bed looking incredibly uncomfortable. He gave me a sad smile and talked about how deeply tragic it was that I lost my family. He said he could not believe the house went up in flames so fast. Then Derek made a massive, fatal mistake. He leaned against the metal bed rail and said, "Man, it's crazy. The fire marshal told the local news the fire started in the kitchen, but I know your bedroom burned first. I can't believe you made it out that window." My blood ran ice cold. The police had not released any information to the public about where the fire actually started. Detective Harper explicitly told me they were keeping the origin points highly classified to weed out false confessions. The news reports only said a house burned down. There was absolutely no way Derek could know the fire started right outside my bedroom door unless he was there. Unless he was the one who poured the gasoline. I looked at a man I had considered a brother for 10 years. I remembered him nervously asking about my smoke detectors. I realized my father had paid off my best friend to murder me. I kept my face completely blank. I nodded slowly, told Derek I was exhausted from the painkillers, and asked him to leave. As soon as the heavy door clicked closed, I pulled the burner phone from the tissue box and furiously texted Maya and Detective Harper. The web of betrayal was massive, and I was sitting right in the center of it. I decided I was no longer the tragic victim in their twisted story. I was going to be the architect of their total destruction. To catch a predator, you have to play dead. I spent the next 4 excruciating days pretending the hospital sedatives were completely destroying my mind. Whenever my father was in the room, I kept my eyes half closed. I deliberately slurred my words. I let him feed me terrible hospital soup like a helpless child. It took every single ounce of self-control in my broken body not to wrap my hands around his throat and squeeze the life out of him right then and there. Because my father truly believed I was heavily drugged out of my mind, he got sloppy. He started taking highly sensitive phone calls inside my room, assuming I was too heavily medicated to process a single word of his conversations. I lay there breathing steadily, listening to him conduct his dark business. That is exactly how I learned about Mr. Caldwell. Caldwell was a high-powered, Incredibly expensive corporate lawyer specializing in massive insurance claims and probate law. My father paced back and forth near the hospital window, arguing loudly on his cell phone. He was furious. I heard him say, "What do you mean the payout is frozen? The house is gone. The physical server is ash. Just process the damn inheritance and the life insurance policy." He paused, listening to Caldwell on the other end, then snapped aggressively, "I don't care if Nathan survived. That wasn't the original plan, but we adjust. You get me the legal custody of his medical proxy, and I will forge the authorization to release the funds if I have to. Just make sure Eleanor and Leo stay strictly out of sight at the resort until the money clears the accounts and we can secure the fake identities." He hastily jotted something down, slipped a piece of paper out of his suit jacket pocket, looked at it, and then crumpled it up and threw it in the trash can before leaving the room to get lunch. The second he was gone, I swung my good leg violently out of bed. I ignored the searing pain in my broken tibia, grabbed my aluminum crutches, and dragged myself over to the garbage can. I dug through the bloody gauze and discarded medical supplies and pulled out the crumpled piece of paper. It was a printed receipt for a private, highly gated luxury estate in a neighboring state, booked under my mother's maiden name. I snapped a crystal-clear photo of the receipt and sent it directly to Detective Harper using the burner phone hidden in my tissue box. While I was gathering critical intelligence from inside the hospital bed, Maya was moving absolute mountains on the outside. She scheduled a private, off-the-books meeting with Mr. Sterling at his exclusive country club. Maya laid out the cold, hard facts. She told him about the fire, the missing physical servers, and Leo's sudden, highly suspicious disappearance. Sterling is a ruthless businessman who absolutely despises being stolen from. He immediately pulled his private team of forensic accountants and had them aggressively dig into the remote cloud backups of Leo's work computer backups my father didn't realize existed because he only understood physical hardware. Maya visited me that night long after visiting hours were over. She slipped past the nurse's station wearing a medical scrub jacket she borrowed from a friend who worked on the surgical floor. She sat on the edge of my bed, her face completely pale, and handed me a thick printed file. The truth was so much worse than a simple accounting error. Leo had systematically, over the course of 6 months, funneled over $6.5 million of company escrow funds into untraceable offshore accounts. My father was the mastermind behind the shell companies receiving the stolen money. The upcoming corporate audit would have undoubtedly sent both my father and my brother to federal prison for decades. They burned my house down to destroy the physical servers and the detailed paper trail I kept locked in my home office. But why lock my door? Why intentionally kill me? Why not just burn the house while I was at the office earning my salary? Maya silently turned to the second page of the file. It was a heavily notarized life insurance policy document. Several months prior, my father had flawlessly forged my signature and taken out a $12 million life insurance policy on my life, naming himself as the sole beneficiary in the event of my accidental death. He had used my own personal details, my social security number, and a fake email address to set it up. The master plan was brilliant, in its pure sociopathic evil. Burn the hard evidence of the $6.5 million corporate theft. Burn me alive in the process. Claim the $12 million life insurance payout. Use half of that blood money to quietly replace the stolen company funds before the federal investigators ever noticed they were gone, and keep the rest to live like absolute kings. They had hired Derek to secure my bedroom doors and spread the accelerant because he owed my father a massive $75,000 from a bad sports gambling debt. They staged the tragic, fiery death of my mother and brother so they could live off the grid in luxury while the legal dust settled and the checks cleared. They looked at my life, my future, and my upcoming marriage to Maya, and they collectively decided it was a perfectly fair trade for a pile of cash and Leo's freedom. I looked at Maya. She had tears in her eyes, not from sadness, but from pure, unadulterated, blinding rage. I handed the file back to her. My chest felt incredibly tight, but my mind was sharper and clearer than it had ever been in my entire 33 years of existence. The weak, desperate son who just wanted his parents' love died in that blazing fire. The man sitting in that hospital bed was someone completely different. I told Maya to call Detective Harper immediately. We had the solid financial motive. We had the exact location of my mother and brother. We had the ironclad insurance fraud evidence. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to go to war. Update 2. The next morning, my father walked briskly into my hospital room with a heavy clipboard and a pen. He put on his absolute best tragic, loving father face. He sat down, patted my leg, and told me it was time to sign the insurance release form so we could finally start rebuilding our broken lives. He handed me the pen, completely unaware that the walls were rapidly closing in around him. I looked down at the dense, intimidating stack of legal documents resting on my plastic hospital tray. These were highly specific, ironclad financial papers drawn up by extremely expensive lawyers. They were designed to officially authorize the release of a $12 million life insurance policy alongside transferring the legal custody of my estate and my ongoing medical proxy directly to him. By signing these crisp white pages, I would be effectively handing my attempted murderers a golden ticket to absolute luxury and permanent freedom. My father stood right over my hospital bed, his breathing shallow and incredibly rapid. His eyes tracked my every single movement like a starving wolf. He truly thought he had completely won the game. He saw nothing but a broken, heavily medicated pawn who was far too blinded by physical agony and profound emotional grief to see the massive knife buried securely in his back. I uncapped the pen. I placed the metal tip directly against the signature line. The smell of his expensive, custom-blended cologne mixed violently with the harsh, sterile smell of hospital antiseptic, making me want to physically gag. I signed my name, but I did not use my actual, legally binding signature. I used a sloppy, jagged, entirely incorrect variation that any competent forensic handwriting expert, bank auditor, or legal clerk would immediately flag as being signed under extreme physical duress or heavy medical sedation. It was a completely invalid, legally useless signature. But my father was far too arrogant, far too blinded by his own insatiable greed to notice the subtle, deliberate difference in the ink. He snatched the heavy wooden clipboard away the absolute second the ink dried. He gave me a wide, hollow smile that did not reach his cold eyes and told me he had to go meet with his lawyer to finalize the transfers. He actually had the absolute unmitigated nerve to tell me he would be back later that evening with premium real estate brochures so we could pick out a new safe house to live in together. He walked confidently out of the hospital room, completely blissfully oblivious to the massive steel trap that was about to snap violently shut on his leg. The absolute second the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind him, Maya walked in quickly from the adjoining hallway, followed closely by Detective Harper, and a senior police investigator named Detective Miller. Miller was an older, deeply cynical veteran cop who had initially suspected I might have started the house fire myself. But after seeing the hard, undeniable digital evidence that Maya and Mr. Sterling had pulled directly from the corporate cloud servers, Miller was fully, fiercely on our side. Detective Harper immediately locked the hospital door and drew the heavy privacy blinds. She laid out a series of high-resolution, time-stamped surveillance photos across my thin hospital blanket. The State Police Cyber Division had successfully tracked the license plate of Leo's Maserati using a massive network of highway toll cameras. My mother and my embezzling brother were currently hiding out in a sprawling, highly secluded luxury villa nestled deep in the mountainous region about 3 hours north of the city limit. Harper looked at me with a deadly serious, unblinking expression. She explained that my father was indeed returning to the hospital that night, but absolutely not with real estate brochures. The police cyber division had successfully intercepted and decrypted a text message my father sent to a prepaid burner phone located at the mountain villa. The intercepted message read exactly like this: "Papers are signed. I am tying up the final loose end tonight. Pack the bags and be ready to move before sunrise." The final loose end was me. My father was not going to wait for the hospital administration to formally discharge me. He realized that the longer I stayed alive in that hospital bed, the higher the mathematical risk became that some smart investigator would start connecting the dots. He was coming back to finish the job he started. He was coming back to murder his own son. That evening, the intensive care floor of the hospital was suspiciously, uncomfortably quiet. Maya had kissed my forehead, squeezed my hand tightly, and left the building to wait safely in a mobile police command center van parked 3 blocks away. Detective Harper and Detective Miller were hiding silently inside the adjoining private bathroom of my hospital suite. The door cracked open just a fraction of an inch to give them a clear, unobstructed line of sight to my bed. I lay alone in the hospital bed. The heart monitor beeped in a slow, steady, agonizingly rhythmic pattern. My palms were sweating profusely beneath the heavy medical gauze. At exactly 9:14 at night, the heavy door to my room slowly clicked open. My father walked in. He did not have any brochures in his hands. He had a small, unmarked glass vial and a specialized medical syringe tucked securely into the palm of his right hand. I kept my eyes closed, consciously controlling my breathing to perfectly simulate a deep, heavy, drug-induced sleep. I listened to his expensive shoes tap softly against the floor as he approached. He walked right up to the side of my bed. I felt his hand gently grip the clear plastic tubing of my intravenous line. He was completely, terrifyingly silent. There was absolutely no hesitation in his fluid movements. There was no final moment of fatherly remorse. He inserted the sharp metal needle of the syringe directly into the soft rubber port and prepared to push a lethal, completely untraceable dose of whatever specialized poison he had managed to acquire on the black market. I opened my eyes, turned my head slowly on the pillow, and looked directly into his face. His eyes widened in absolute paralyzing shock. He froze completely, his thumb resting heavily on the plunger of the syringe, unable to process the data his brain was receiving. Before his mind could even begin to comprehend the horrific reality that I was fully awake, completely lucid, and staring right at him, the bathroom door violently kicked open. Detective Miller lunged across the hospital room like a runaway freight train. He grabbed my father by the back of his expensive custom-tailored suit jacket and slammed him face first into the solid concrete wall with a sickening heavy thud. The glass syringe clattered harmlessly to the linoleum floor. Detective Harper drew her service weapon, aiming it squarely at the center of my father's back, and screamed at him to stay down and show his empty hands. My father shrieked in sudden panic. He thrashed wildly against the hard wall and aggressively demanded to speak to his lawyer. He yelled that he was a highly respected businessman and that this was a gross display of severe police brutality. Miller completely ignored his pathetic outrage. He simply pulled my father's arms forcefully behind his back, slapped heavy, cold steel handcuffs onto his wrists, and began reading him his Miranda rights in a loud, booming voice. I used my good arm to push myself up into a seated position in my hospital bed. I looked down at the man who had raised me, the man who had deliberately locked me in a burning room to protect his embezzling, worthless favorite son. His face was bright red with a mixture of impotent rage and profound, shattering humiliation. I looked him dead in the eye and told him I truly hope he likes the terrible food in federal prison because his precious Bentley was going to be sold at a local police auction to pay for my medical bills. But arresting my father in that hospital room was only phase 1 of the operation. Phase 2 was the grand reunion. Despite my severe physical injuries, my broken leg, and the intense, searing pain radiating through my burned skin, I absolutely insisted on being physically present for the police raid on the mountain villa. I had a fundamental, undeniable legal and moral right to face my abusers when their carefully constructed world came crashing down around them. Maya and Harper arranged for a specialized, privately funded medical transport van. The paramedics carefully loaded my heavy wheelchair into the back of the vehicle, securing the wheels to the floorboards. We closely followed the long convoy of unmarked, heavily armored police tactical vehicles up the dark, winding, treacherous mountain roads. We arrived at the luxury estate just past midnight. The villa was a massive ultra-modern glass and steel architectural masterpiece surrounded by dense towering pine trees. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows, I could clearly see my mother and Leo. They were absolutely not mourning my tragic, fiery death. They were actively celebrating their newfound wealth and freedom. Leo was sitting comfortably on a plush white leather sofa, playing violent video games on a massive flat-screen television with the surround sound volume turned all the way up. My mother was standing in the sleek designer kitchen, wearing expensive silk pajamas and pouring herself a generous glass of vintage red wine from a freshly opened bottle. Detective Harper stood by the open doors of the transport van, looked at me for final confirmation, and gave the heavily armed tactical team the green light to breach. The police did not politely knock on the front door. They used a massive heavy steel battering ram to smash the custom mahogany door completely off its reinforced hinges. The sound echoed through the quiet mountain air like a military bomb detonating. Dozens of heavily armed tactical police officers swarmed into the luxurious living room, screaming loud, aggressive commands to get on the ground and show their hands. Leo screamed in pure, unadulterated terror. He dropped his expensive video game controller, threw his hands high in the air, and immediately started crying hysterically like a terrified, helpless child. He dropped to his knees before an officer even touched him, sobbing into the expensive rug. My mother shrieked in shock and dropped her crystal wine glass. It shattered violently across the polished hardwood floor, the dark red wine splashing everywhere, looking exactly like fresh blood pooling on the wood. Once the massive living area was completely secured and both of my family members were locked in heavy steel handcuffs, forced to sit side by side on the sofa they had just been lounging on, Detective Harper signaled Maya. Maya gripped the rubber handles of my wheelchair and slowly wheeled me through the shattered, splintered front entrance of the villa, pushing me directly into the center of the living room. The air in the room was instantly sucked out. My mother stared at me, her jaw physically dropped open. She stopped breathing. She looked at my heavily bandaged arms, my thick plaster-casted leg elevated on the chair, and the angry red burn scars covering the entire left side of my face. For a brief, incredibly naive second, the small wounded child still buried deep inside my psyche thought I might actually see a flicker of genuine maternal relief in her eyes. I thought maybe she would be truly glad that her firstborn son did not burn to ash in a locked room. I was so incredibly wrong. My mother's face twisted into a grotesque, terrifying mask of pure, unadulterated venomous hatred. She strained violently against the steel handcuffs holding her wrists tightly behind her back, the metal cutting into her skin. She looked me dead in the eye, her face red and contorted with absolute fury, and screamed at the absolute top of her lungs. "Why didn't you just die? You ruined everything. We were supposed to be completely free, you selfish, ungrateful, pathetic brat. Why didn't you just burn in that room?" That was the exact moment, the precise defining second, that the last remaining heavy steel chain of my childhood trauma snapped completely in half. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, The woman I had spent 33 agonizing years desperately trying to impress and love, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no deep sadness, no longing for her affection. Just total, freezing absolute apathy. I thought the worst was over. I thought the truth was entirely out in the open. I was so incredibly wrong. The chaotic aftermath at the downtown police precinct was an absolute textbook masterclass in the profound cowardice of highly toxic people. I sat quietly in a dimly lit, heavily air-conditioned police observation room alongside Maya and Detective Miller. We were watching directly through the massive two-way glass mirror as Detective Harper methodically interrogated my family members in separate isolated holding rooms. Felix, the golden child who could do absolutely no wrong, cracked under the intense pressure in less than 10 minutes. He threw our father directly and unapologetically under the proverbial bus to save his own skin. He fully admitted to the corporate embezzlement, detailing exactly how he moved the funds, but he aggressively claimed that our father emotionally abused and physically forced him to do it. He literally cried for his mommy. My mother was interrogated next. Eleanor aggressively tried to play the classic, highly manipulated role of the terrified, severely battered housewife. She claimed she was a helpless, innocent victim who had absolutely no access to the family bank accounts and no prior knowledge of the $12 million life insurance fraud. But Detective Harper just smiled a cold, predatory, shark-like smile. She reached into her thick manila folder and slid a massive stack of freshly printed, highly incriminating emails directly across the metal interrogation table. They were emails from my mother's completely secret, heavily encrypted Proton Mail account. Emails where she explicitly and meticulously researched which specific brand of chemical accelerant burned the hottest and fastest without leaving easily traceable chemical residue for the fire marshal to find. Emails where she aggressively contacted a shady offshore real estate broker to purchase a massive beachfront property in Costa Rica using the exact projected payout amount of my life insurance policy as the down payment. My mother looked down at the printed emails scattered across the table. The delicate, tragic tears stopped instantly. Her face turned into a hard, furious, unyielding stone, and she aggressively demanded a lawyer. But the biggest, most earth-shattering shock of the entire night came during my father's intense interrogation. My father aggressively refused to speak to the detectives, demanding repeatedly to see his high-powered attorney, Mr. Caldwell. But Mr. Caldwell had already called the police precinct, and formally dropped my father as a client the absolute second he heard about the first-degree attempted murder charges. Detective Miller walked into my father's interrogation room holding a thick, freshly printed digital forensics report. The police cyber division had completely cracked my father's heavily encrypted cell phone. They had successfully recovered months of deleted text messages. But the most damning messages were not between my father and Derek, the hired arsonist. The messages were between my father and Uncle Vance. I physically stood up from my wheelchair in the dark observation room, completely ignoring the sharp shooting pain radiating up my broken leg. Uncle Vance, the soft-spoken gentle peacemaker, the wise older brother who always told me to be the bigger person. Detective Miller read the recovered text messages out loud. Uncle Vance was not just an innocent passive bystander. He was the actual calculating mastermind behind the entire criminal operation. Vance was a former senior claims adjuster for a massive insurance conglomerate. He knew exactly how aggressive insurance fraud investigations were conducted and how to bypass the red flags. Vance was the one who utilized his shady industry contacts to set up the untraceable offshore shell companies to hide Leo's stolen millions. Vance was the one who explicitly instructed my father on how to perfectly forge my signature on the life insurance documents. And most horrifying of all, Vance was the one who personally introduced my father to Derek's aggressive gambling bookie. Miller read a text message Vance sent at exactly 1:15 in the morning on the night of the fire. The message simply read, "The kid is asleep, the cameras are offline. Tell Derek to lock the bedroom door tight and light the match. Make sure the server melts completely. I want my 30% cut wired to the Cayman account by Friday." My knees physically buckled beneath me. Maya caught me instantly and gently helped me back into the absolute safety of the wheelchair. The absolute betrayal was so deep, so profound and absolute. My entire extended family structure was a deeply coordinated, highly functioning criminal enterprise. Before we left the precinct to return to the hospital, I asked Detective Harper for exactly 5 minutes alone with my mother in the holding room. I wheeled myself slowly into the cold interrogation room. My mother aggressively refused to look at me. I spoke to her with the absolute freezing cold precision of a senior financial analyst finalizing a hostile, merciless corporate takeover. I told her that I had already instructed Maya to contact a ruthless team of civil litigators to file a massive multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit against their entire estate for extreme emotional distress, severe physical injury, and gross negligence. I told her that the aggressive lawsuit would completely methodically drain every single cent of their remaining assets, including their pristine suburban house, their retirement funds, and Arthur's precious Bentley. They would not have a single dime left to pay for competent criminal defense lawyers. She finally turned her head and looked at me. Her eyes were filled with genuine fear and deep, unyielding resentment. "You chose Leo," I said, my voice dangerously quiet and incredibly steady. "You chose to protect the golden child over my life. I hope he deeply enjoys spending his inheritance in a federal prison cell." I turned my heavy wheelchair around and rolled out of the room without looking back a single time. The criminal trial was an absolute unmitigated media circus. The local and state news stations picked up the story immediately. A wealthy, highly respected suburban family caught red-handed burning their own successful son alive to cover up massive corporate embezzlement and claim a fraudulent $12 million life insurance payout. The courtroom was packed every single day. My father, my mother, Leo, and Uncle Vance all sat closely together at the long wooden defense tables. The expensive country club polish was entirely gone, replaced by the harsh, brutal reality of the penal system. My father had lost at least 30 pounds. His expensive tailored suits were replaced by a bright, oversized orange jail jumpsuit. My mother looked incredibly aged and hollow. Leo just stared blankly at the floor, crying silently and pathetically throughout the entire proceeding. Vance sat perfectly rigid, his face a terrifying mask of bitter, silent defeat. The final absolutely crushing blow came from Derek. Derek had taken a massive, heavily negotiated plea deal to avoid a life sentence for attempted murder. He testified in excruciating, horrifying detail about how my father and Uncle Vance paid him $75,000 in cold cash to wait until I was deeply asleep, wedge a heavy wooden doorstop under my bedroom door handle, completely trapping me inside, and pour 3 massive gallons of premium gasoline along the hallway carpet. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. The foreman stood up and read the verdicts. Arthur, guilty of first-degree attempted murder, felony arson, and massive federal insurance fraud. Eleanor, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and wire fraud. Leo, guilty of extreme corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Uncle Vance, guilty of federal racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, and massive insurance fraud. The federal judge sentenced my father and Uncle Vance to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. My mother received 40 years, effectively a life sentence for a woman her age. Leo, the golden child who could do no wrong, was slapped with 35 years in a maximum security facility. As the armed bailiffs moved in to place the heavy steel handcuffs on them, my father finally turned and looked directly at me. He opened his mouth to speak, but I did not give him the satisfaction of a single word. I turned my back on him completely, took Maya's arm, and walked proudly and silently out of the courtroom and into the bright, warm sunlight of a new life. With the massive financial settlement I rightfully won from the aggressive civil lawsuit against my parents' heavily liquidated estate, I did not just buy a nice house and a fast car for myself. I took the millions of dollars they tried to greedily hide in offshore accounts, and I established a massive well-funded legal defense foundation. We specifically provide high-powered corporate lawyers, aggressive financial auditors, and secure housing for victims of severe domestic financial abuse and toxic family manipulation. I took the exact weapon my family constantly used to oppress and control me: money, legal threats, and absolute financial isolation, and turned it into an impenetrable shield for people who are currently trapped exactly where I used to be. Family is absolutely not the people who demand your constant exhausting sacrifice while giving you nothing but harsh criticism and conditional approval in return. Family is the strong woman who smuggles a prepaid burner phone into a closely guarded hospital room so you can fight back against your abusers. Family is the brave detective who risks her own professional career to whisper the terrifying truth in your ear when you are at your absolute weakest. I cut the deep rotting infection completely out of my life, and in doing so, I finally found absolute unwavering peace.